Hello, folks. I am Ken Briota, Editorial Director for IoTEvolutionWorld.com, and I am here at the IoT Evolution Expo. We're talking about the hottest new tech in the IoT that you need to know about as you plan your strategy for the next year. I'm here with Bob of Zeidman, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what he's been working on in the last little while.
Ken, thanks for having me. So my company, Zeidman Technologies, has a new product called Synthos. And Synthos is really revolutionary because what it does, it has to do with the firmware at the edge of the devices, the edge of the IoT, the actual things, the actual devices. Something that doesn't always get a lot of attention. What happens is most of these devices need to be small, they need to be low power, they need to be low cost. A lot of them are consumer devices. And if you look at the options that are out there, there's a lot of 32-bit processors. You need an operating system on them, a real-time operating system, which means a lot of memory. It drives the price up, drives the cost up. So what we have is Synthos is actually a push-button technique for generating an optimized real-time operating system for these things. And it requires very little memory. It works on a tiny, tiny processor. We've gotten operating systems on something that people think you can't put an operating system, an 8-bit processor, for example. And by the way, sometimes when people hear operating system, they think of Windows, Linux. We're talking about a scheduler. And what I tell people is if you've got some sensors and the Internet of Things, and these sensors, these modules, let's say, with the sensors are doing two or more things, then you need what we call a real-time operating system. Some people call it a scheduler, a state machine. But basically, it's got to take data from the sensor, and it's at least got to take data from the sensor and communicate it over the Internet. So there's two things going on. And if you try to write this code, which I used to do myself by hand, and I know a lot of people that did, you're handling sensor data and some packet comes in on the Internet and you miss it. Or you handle the packets on the Internet and you miss the sensor data. So you really need to have something coordinated. And most of these IoT companies don't have big staffs also to understand operating systems, which could be even the small real-time operating systems could be pretty complicated. So ours, we've got 5 primitives as opposed to hundreds of APIs. You know those 5 primitives? You can write any task with those, say how the tasks communicate to each other, what the priorities are, how to schedule them. Push a button, boom, your whole system is there. No race conditions, no deadlocks, no hazards of any kind.
That's great. Now, I know that there's something near and dear to your heart that we were talking about earlier, and I want to talk a little bit more about privacy and about personal security and what's going on with the IoT. Obviously, it's one of those issues that gets talked about a lot and very little understood. So what I'm hoping you can shed some light on is what privacy really means in the IoT. Is it even a thing anymore?
Yeah, I've come to an interesting perspective, I think, that there's a few things that concern me, but the issue with privacy, I wonder if we're going back to something that's more like, something of 50 or 100 years ago when we lived in small villages, we didn't actually expect much privacy. In the modern age, the industrial age, we've come to be anonymous. And we all know what people can do on the Internet when they're anonymous. They do, stuff that they wouldn't do if people knew they were doing it. So in some sense, maybe, this lack of privacy because of these sensors all around that are monitoring us and our websites monitoring us, maybe in some sense we're losing privacy, but only back to what it was 50 or 100 years ago, with the exception that I think back then when you went into your house, your neighbors, you shut your curtains, your neighbors didn't know what you were doing. Whereas now we are moving into our house and we are having more sensors, whether the thermostats or our appliances, that know what we're doing. So we are moving back in this old direction, but maybe to an extreme. So it's a concern. I think people are right to be concerned. The other issue I'll just mention is that the other thing that's happening, though, that's unique, I think, is that companies that track our motions and our movements and what we're looking at and how, what temperature we're setting the thermostat to and how we like our toast done, for example, and what we eat for dinner, are changing our behaviors. And that's something I don't hear about as much. But I think that is, to me, it's a concern because now, your refrigerator can direct you towards eating certain foods. And whether it's because they want to make a profit off of selling foods or they think it's healthier for you, it's still changing your behavior. So not just monitoring your behavior and losing your privacy that way, but affecting your behavior is just something I think we all need to think about.
It's definitely worth being aware of anyway. Bob, I want to say thanks very much for taking some time for us today. Folks, I am Ken Briota. I'm the editorial director of IoT Evolution World, and you can find me online on Twitter at Ken Briota and at IoT Evolution. Where can we find out more about you and your company, Bob?
So the company is at Zeidman.biz, Z-E-I, E before I-D-M-A-N.biz, and Twitter, I'm at Bob_Zeidman.
That's great, Bob. Thanks very much. Folks, we'll see you next time.